Fatigue is the worst part about Fab, but not in the way that you think. Let me explain. First of all, what is fatigue? Fatigue is a strategy where you win through running your opponent out of cards in deck, but not necessarily through milling them out, but that can happen. Usually this is done by playing defensively and preventing as much damage as possible, or by presenting threats to your opponent that they have to block, making them not have enough damage in hand to get over your block value, and by making them lose total cards in deck through the act of blocking, making them not have enough total damage in deck to win the game. Fatigue has multiple things that I can point out that make it a problem, such as how mentally taxing it can be to play against in multiple rounds in a row, or how much of a negative play experience it can be playing against someone that's just not playing the game and they're just blocking with their whole hand all game. Or how it can cause rounds to go overtime and make all the rounds go really long in a tournament, extending the total length of a tournament. But the real issue is how, well, 69% of you aren't subscribed to the channel. Come on, guys. What are we doing here? We hit that button down there. But in all seriousness, the real issue is how difficult it is to deal with for a new to average player. Basically, the ways that you typically go about beating fatigue is by either going over the top of what kind of block value a fatigue deck can present, which is usually in that kind of range of like 12 to 15, not counting armor. So you try to set up rounds that can go way above that, like a 25-30 damage round. You look at something like Briar, where they set up Channel Mount Heroic and then can send multiple attacks in a single turn for like 7, 7, 7, 7. You go way over the top of what they're able to block, getting a ton of damage in, and then you wait until you have another round like that, and you're able to close the game out that way. Another way can be hard to block or impossible to block damage, such as evasive small attacks like Kadachi's, or split damage from a Rune Blade, where it's just like not efficient to block it because it's coming in both the form of physical and arcane, and you can't dedicate one card to prevent all of the damage efficiently. Another form of evasion could be Dominate, though a lot of these fatigue decks typically pack a lot of defense reactions, so that's usually not a great answer there. Or unpreventable damage that make it so they just can't stop you from doing the damage unless they actually block it. Another way to answer fatigue is setup decks such as Prism, or Icelander, or Dash, or Dromai, where you present lots of permanents. Lastly is a recursive value engine, such as Dash with their items, or with Levia and their ability to repeatedly play cards from their graveyard, banishing them, playing them from banish, putting them back in the graveyard, and repeating the cycle ad nauseum. Now the problem is that none of this is obvious to a newer intermediate player that is trying to get into the game. Maybe that's on us as content creators. Maybe we need to be making more educational content talking about this and teaching players how to deal with these kind of strategies. I counter with that there should be more clear answers to the strategy for how long this has been successful in the game. You look back, you had Turokatsu, you had Defensive Dash, you had Oldhim very recently, now we have Bravo doing this, you had Fatigue Prism back in the Chain days. Almost every format of the game, it seems like we've had Fatigue be a really powerful strategy. That being said, is content on how to beat fatigue something that you guys would like to see? As I was writing this video, I realized that thought I just made, and I was like, oh, maybe I could just do that. So if you guys want to see some anti-fatigue stuff of like kind of going through these strategies a bit more, let me know and I can make some videos on that in the future. But the answer, I want to see what I think the game desperately needs. We need some products that help players organically learn these things on their own. Now, what do I mean by that? I will give an example of what I would like to see specifically. Obviously, it doesn't have to be this, just this is an idea I've had floating around in my brain. You have a precon product of some sort, like Blitz decks or something, and one of the Blitz decks is a fatigue style deck, or it can be played as a fatigue deck. And the other 2 to 3 decks in that precon format have a subset of cards or single card in them that is meant to play well into the fatigue deck. You know, you got your buddies together, each of you grab one of the decks, and you play into that fatigue deck. You play this card that's meant to be good into the strategy. You see that it's successful against the fatigue deck. You get that dopamine hit of, wow, this is actually really good here. This felt good into my opponent just like aggressively blocking me every turn. Now that player will go look for other cards that have similar effects to that will feel good to play, leading to them organically learning how to beat a specific strategy with very non-obvious answers, because some of the ways that you beat fatigue is so obtuse. Like, I'll give an example. When I was playing Dromai for Nationals last year, I had to do all these crazy hoop jumps where I had to cycle out my arsenal every turn and always arsenal a new card. That way I could always play around exposed until I hit my E-Pot. Then I could put the E-Pot into play. Then I play all of my Ashwing generation, get my Ghostly Touch up to like 25 counters, then crack Mage Master Boost, putting Passing Mirage into play, swing with a Ghostly Touch. It's not reasonable to expect a new player to be able to figure that out on their own, and the way that net decking works in this game, you can't just look at a deck list a lot of times and go, this is obviously the answer to this kind of strategy. You need cards that are easy to understand for these kind of players, for them to kind of pick up and play into these things like, man, every time I go to my armory, there's this fatigue deck and I can just never beat it. And you just let that player slot some cards into the deck. Even if they're not optimal, they feel good for them to play in that matchup. They feel like they have more game there without having to like 19D chess their opponent with some Giga Brain strategy. I don't necessarily want these cards in these types of decks to be like meta-defining cards or anything like that. I want them to get these players thinking about how they deal with these strategies to make them go look on their own and how to beat them. I think a great example of that we've seen recently, since I've been playing anyways, was like the subset of Earth cards in Tales of Aria, where help you put cards back in your deck. More recently, Give and Take, that was another card that feels good into that kind of matchup. You say, hey, if you're gonna block me, I'm gonna gas back up. And pretty much cards that say when you block is a great place, I think, for those kind of effects. It's very easy for a new player to understand. This says, hey, if my opponent's blocking, this does something. Maybe I should look at other cards that say win block, and now I can go have this kind of keyword search. But what do you think, dear viewer? Do you think fatigue should be a viable strategy in the game in the context in which I've outlined it here, where you're just trying to block very aggressively and essentially not play the game, just raw run your opponent out of cards? Personally, I think a strategy like that shouldn't be a premier strategy in the game. I think it's fine for it to exist and be something that people can pull out when they need to counter other specific strategies when they become too good. Like, hey, if you're going to play a deck that just loses to just raw block with 4 cards every round, well, now we can pull this out and that beats that. But I personally don't think it should be a premier strategy in the game. I'm fine, though, with a type of fatigue deck that's fatiguing through making the opponent block, and it's far more about resource management on both sides of the table. We're both trying to play the sub-game of how do we win without running out of cards. But I'd like to hear what you guys think. Please let me know in the comments below, and as always, thank you so much for watching. If you like videos like this, please consider joining my Patreon to help support the channel, or clicking the join button, or at least hitting subscribe on the channel. It's free. It's free real estate. Just click the button down below. As always, thank you for watching.